There I am. Hello. Good morning. I am Steve Weber. Welcome to the American Gumption Morning Show, broadcasting on the American Gumption YouTube page and American Gumption Facebook page. So welcome to today. Alrighty. So I am Steve Weber, and I am the host of the American Gumption Morning Show. American Gumption showcases ordinary individuals living extraordinary lives. And the reason that we like to focus on the ordinary, extraordinary is because our world needs more positivity and encouragement. And we are encouragers here at the American Gumption Show. And I also believe that every person is both ordinary and extraordinary. And I love finding that balance and mix of both of those things. All right. So the goal of the show is to help those who are awakening or those who want to awaken, and to, at that point then, to help people live their life with gumption. So, all right, welcome to today's show. It's show number 199, show 199. We're almost up to 200. Today's July 7th, and it just so happens to be my 63rd birthday. So happy birthday to me. All right, so the monologue that I'm going to do is called Souls, Not Bodies. Souls, Not Bodies. That's going to be about 8 or 9 minutes, I think. And then after that, I'm going to bring up our guest, Peter Panagore. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing his name correctly. Panagore or Panagore? Panagore. Yes, Panagore. He's giving me the thumbs up. No, I don't know. We'll figure this out. All right. Anyway, so Peter has written a book. And that book is titled Heaven is Beautiful. And I heard Peter on a Sunday broadcast, and I just became fascinated with his story. I immediately got the book and then read it and reached out, and he's gracious enough to come and join us. And we'll talk about that. He's doing a lot of things since the book, but we'll talk primarily today, I think, about the book, and then we'll hear some of the other things that he's doing. So, alrighty, now what I'm going to do, let's see, planning to do a show tomorrow, although I don't have a guest scheduled. On Friday, Kimberly Palm will join us, and we're going to talk about who she is, but living a purposeful life is going to be the theme. All righty. And then next week, I've got some shows, but we're not going to worry about those today. All righty. So let's go ahead and jump right into this monologue, Souls, Not Bodies. And one of the great things about this broadcast on a regular basis is I get to take inspiration from the guests that I have on. And so, this isn't specifically what Peter talks about, but this is kind of my own evolution of thinking and evolvement. So I'm just going to tell a little story on how I shifted from being a person who thought that I was a body who had a soul attached to it to being a soul that is temporarily living this human experience. And so the soul shifted from being like this little piece that got attached to this body to the idea that the soul is really where we are. And then this human experience currently going on is just, one lifetime. So there you go. All right. So I was raised believing that I was a body, an individual, and separate from everyone else. And this is a pretty common story. This was kind of just what we learned. And somehow along the way at birth, or possibly at conception, that was never really made clear to me, the soul attaches to the body. And I guess I kind of specifically have memories of that being explained to me. Like, it's like, oh, the soul attaches to the body. Well, when does that happen? Well, you hear all these crazy stories and, blah, blah, blah. And the soul was given to me by God or the creator at that time. So it was sort of like there was some kind of a soul keeper who divvied them out. And now that this human body, this person that I am, gets that. That's kind of the, that was kind of the story of how it came to be and attached. And then after my life was over, right, when you die, I like to think of it as transitioning nowadays, but the story back when I learned us all was when you die, you are eternal and you go off to heaven, or you go to the other place if you didn't live a good life. But basically that was the, so the soul becomes this eternal thing. Now, it never quite made sense to me that the soul started out once poof, attached to me, and then it became eternal, I guess. And I've kind of since come to think well, wait, eternal is eternal. It's not like beginning and end. It's like So anyway, this is, but these were all things that I never even thought about or questioned. I just was, you're just taught them, and, you just follow along with it. And life was a test, and we had to follow certain rules and please God. God was a bit of a benevolent dictator who, looked over, he was up on the throne, and, you were to be feared and scared of him. So that's I think the very first part of this. So 2009, I began my journey of awakening, and really it was a matter of realizing that, wait a minute, certain things just don't make any sense. They're not adding up. And it was right after the economic crisis of 2008, and financially some of the decisions that I had made that were following all the rules of what you were supposed to do, weren't working out. And, I found myself in this position where I had to make some radical changes because, following the plan just wasn't quite working out the way it was. And so I ended up going through a multiple year period where I went back and kind of examined all of my core beliefs. And I would ask myself questions like, is this true? And how did I even come to believe this? And as I think about that, how did I come to believe it? Well, there's two categories, my parents and family, and, one and the same, really. Obviously lived in, with my parents, but there was extended family, grandparents, aunts and uncles. And that story was all kind of consistent throughout that. And that was a great thing. That was a very safe childhood that I lived. And then the church and the school. And it turns out they were kind of one and the same, because I was a member of the Catholic Church and attended Catholic schools for 12 years. Alrighty. So, but I would ask myself, what's true and what's just a story? And it was a kind of like I had always, up until before 2009, around my 50th birthday, I things didn't make sense, but I could never square them. I could never figure it out. I could never quite, and you never got any. But then I just would sort of give up and not even worry about it. All right. So in 2014, I realized, or had a knowing, that we're all connected and there are no coincidences. That was pretty profound. And I remember writing that specifically down. We're all connected. It was like, oh my God, everything is connected. We are connected by energy. Everything is connected vibrationally. And I stopped using the term God at that point in my life. And I instead felt like universe was a better description of what God was. It was like this connectedness. And then I would substitute source or creator, or more recently, the quantum field, as some people who, are doing more scientific, proving of all this existence, bring it in. And so anyway, I've done that. Now, I like the term God too. So it doesn't make a difference what you want to call this energy that connects us all. And also, pre all of that, I remember being on, putting up a profile on dating sites, and they would ask the category, what's your religion? And of course, they had the major ones, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, and then all the flavors of Christianity, Catholic or Protestant, and none of them quite felt right. But then they had this thing called spiritual, not religious. And I remember going, I can check that one with conviction, because I just didn't feel Catholic. And in some ways, I wasn't even 100% sure I felt Christian. I always connected with, Christianity, and that was cool that way. But it was like, there was just still questions that weren't quite, being answered. So as I continued searching for my truth, the idea of incarnation was introduced to me. Now, that was not something that I was led to believe as a child. In fact, this idea that the soul just got attached to the body, and then, there was no incarnation. That was a Catholic teaching. And so I didn't think a whole lot about it, but that was planted deeply in my psyche, from childhood. And then all of a sudden I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. What is it? There was a lot of people who I was following who would be, called spiritual teachers. And they would tell the story of how, we choose to come into this lifetime, and that we have a knowing that we're choosing to come. It's like an option. We go, oh yeah, I want to go back to life. And then you get born, but then you have this forgetting that occurs. But children sometimes will remember, and they'll say like the craziest things, like it's like, how did the kid know that? And then they get kind of squished down with that thinking, and they get encouraged not to, oh, that's just you're just having a fantasy. That's just make believe. That's not truth. And so all of this, as I started listening to it over the course of, the last decade, really, multiple years, but it started to make more sense to me, more and more sense. So in 2016, I told a friend and mentor, I don't remember any of my past lifetimes. So I was already like beginning to well, is it possible that I've had past lifetimes and that the soul is eternal and we, incarnate many times? I mean, this is what I was being introduced to, those ideas. And I'm trying to decide, is this true? Is this true? That kind of thing. So she said, well, just consider that it's possible. And I guess like her just saying, like, it wasn't like she said it's true or anything, but you just consider that it's possible. And I went home and I had like an instant, like kind of a transformation in beliefs at that moment when I went, oh, this is possible, or maybe it was a sense of a knowing it. So anyway, today I believe that, we are a soul and we've chosen to come into this lifetime with full awareness of what we were doing prior to that coming and living consciously. This is what I talk most of the time about here at the show. It's living a conscious life and digging up those subconscious beliefs and, retraining our brain to, be, so our subconscious beliefs are matching what our conscious beliefs are. I believe that living consciously is all part of that remembering. And that this lifetime is temporary and that our soul is an eternal. And so we are not this body with a soul attached to it, as I originally came to believe, but we are this spirit soul that is living many different lifetimes, and this is just one of them. And so it's all been evolving and all coming to make sense. So I thank Peter for allowing me to kind of take his story and just add a little more validity to these beliefs that I've been developing over the last multiple years. So with that, I'd like to introduce Peter to the show. Let's see if I can figure out how to do this properly. There we go. Good morning, Peter. How are you doing?
I'm great, Steve. That was really great to hear. Your description was fantastic.
It's been a long journey. Like we only met like a few weeks ago. And when I heard you do this broadcast but this is this story's been like bubbling up for the last 10 years, like maybe even longer than that. But, consciously, I've been like trying to figure it out. And so when I meet someone like you, I'm like, oh, this is like, it's like a validation point. It's like a confirmation. So anyway, we can use that as a bit of a launching off point. But before we do that, we have a couple of rules, Peter. If you're like me, I think you are, we don't particularly like rules a whole lot.
I wasn't going to say anything, but yeah.
So anyway, but these rules
I'm good about it. I'll be good about it.
They're pretty easy. Let me just explain what they are. The first rule is that I get to read a bio and an intro and tell people a little bit about who you are. That's easy enough, huh? Number two is that we have a theme song that we play anytime a person is a first-time guest on the show. So I want to read the bio and then play the song, and then we just turn it over to you and let you, share with us how heaven is beautiful. How's that sound?
Sounds beautiful. Thank you.
All righty. So
I can follow those easy rules.
Yeah. I'm relatively confident that you are, you and I, rules never really like fit into our agenda. All righty. So who is Peter? Reverend Peter. And is it Panagore? Panagore. Let me get
Panagore, no accent on the E. Panagore.
Panagore.
Yep.
Thank you. So Reverend Peter Panagore is a knowing messenger of God's love. He is also a husband, father, grandfather, a two-time near-death experiencer, not just once, twice. He's a storyteller, an ordained minister, writer, best-selling book author, entrepreneur, public speaker, TV talent, producer, and more. My gosh, we won't have time to get to the more part, that's for sure. Peter earned his Master of Divinity at Yale University with a focus on classics of Western mysticism. That's heavy stuff. He served 18 years as a congregational community minister in the United Church of Christ, primarily along the coast of Maine, which is where he still lives today. For 15 years, from 2003 to 2018, Peter broadcast a daily 2-minute spot on 2 NBC TV stations titled Daily Devotions. That was a regular gig you had there. Pretty good. Peter mentioned the 2 death experiences, NDEs. We'll call them NDEs. I just learned that too. The acronym. There we go. His first death occurred in 1980 from hypothermia while ice climbing in Banff Provincial Park in Canada. And this is the book right here. And that's what we'll talk primarily about. And then he died again from a heart attack in 2015. Well, hey, I'm glad I caught you before you had your 3rd one, because
3 times the charm.
And since we know heaven is beautiful, you might not come back the next time.
Probably not.
All righty. So Heaven is Beautiful is the first book that describes his first NDE. 2 Minutes for God, Quick Fixes for the Spirit is his second book. And he's currently working on a 3rd book with the working title Modern Mysticism and You. Today, Peter is focused primarily focused on bringing the message of love to others through various means, including Not Church Sundays. I like this, Not Church Sundays, live stream meditations, videos, counseling, books, articles, speaking engagements, and appearing on shows like this. So thank you, Peter, for joining us. Welcome to the American Gumption Morning Show.
Thank you.
Now, I got to play this song, and then we can have our fun. How's that sound? All righty. Have you ever had a marching band welcome you to a broadcast before, Peter?
No, and I love that song. Okay, my feet were marching under my desk.
I think if I remember, did I read that you were in the band, a marching band in high school?
No, I wasn't in the marching band in high school. But I did march as a Boy Scout year after year after year, and but I love that song. I've had marching in my life.
We grew up kind of at that same time when, like on 4th of July, families gathered in their little towns and communities, and there was the high school band marched down the street, and that was kind of part of what we do. And I don't know whether they do that as much anymore. My guess is probably not, because everything changes. But that's the era that we grew up in, and then we kind of shared some similar things. And I think that's why I was attracted to your story. First of all, I lived in Montana for 10 years. When I done my awakening, I went and hid out in Montana for a 10-year period and sat on the side of the hill looking at the mountain, figuring all this stuff out. And 2 years ago, I said, okay, it's time for me to leave and go back out into the world. And so I was in the Bitterroot Valley, just south of Missoula.
Driven through there a bunch of times. Beautiful place.
You were over in the Bozeman area.
I was.
Yeah. So, and then of course we also, you didn't say it specifically, but I interpreted that you attended Catholic schools also.
St. John's outside of Boston.
Yep. So we had that kind of experience. And so anyway, it was just so, and I was an adventurer. I like to go out and do some rock climbing. And I didn't quite ever do anything quite as risky as you did, but I did a little bit of that, and so I kind of liked it. So when I heard about your story, I was like, it's like you just have a knowing and go, I got to read this, and I got the book, and I essentially did it like on a Saturday afternoon, and just sat and did in a single reading, sat down and went through it all, and it was great, and I was able to relate to so much of what you talked about, not only from the the piece that kind of inspired me to share the story, of the fact that we're this eternal beings and knowing this, but just the adventure, and you're a young kid, and you were just following along, doing what your heart said go do, and have fun at the time. And I don't know how much of the book we want to talk about, but we should probably at least tell a little bit of the story. Would that be okay?
Sure. What part? What would you like to hear?
Well, let's start with Tim. I'll just say you started out. Tell the part where you suddenly find yourself in like a temporarily, like out in Montana, but then it turns into like this, like 2 semesters instead of 1 semester, and then you meet Tim, and like Tim's a pretty important part of the story. So,
well, Tim and I met because it was coming up on spring break, and I didn't want to go back to Boston to visit my family because I was in Montana to get away from them for family reasons that I go into in the book.
Right.
And so I've been a part of the outdoor club, led some trips for the outdoor club, and went on other trips that other people led. And so I went to the outdoor club at Montana State University in Bozeman, and I looked for something to do. And there was a poster up there by a guy named Tim, and with little tags on the bottom that you could tear off with his phone number because we didn't have cell phones. And it said he had planned this big adventure, and he gave some of his credentials. He was going to do a 10-day trip into the Canadian Rocky Mountains. Most of the trip was going to be snow caving on backcountry skis with 70-pound packs deep into the wilderness inside of British Columbia, and then come back just over the border and back into Alberta and go into the Banff Provincial Park to do an ice climb. I've never ice climbed. I'd been snow caving, and I'd been backcountry skiing, but I never combined the two. Mm-hmm. And I'd been a backpacker and an outdoor wilderness person and an adventurer. So this was not outside of my realm of doing things. And so I called him up, and we found ourselves simpatico and decided that we had complementary skill sets. And so off we went. And
the trip had a couple little hiccups at the beginning. Like the very first night out, you couldn't find this particular cabin that you were supposed to find and stay there. And just describe how that like first day helped you and Tim kind of bond and, set the stage for everything that's going to follow in the next 10 days.
Thank you for saying that, Steve, because that's exactly what happened. Tim and I got to know each other a little bit beforehand because we were planning the trip, and then we drove up together. We got to know each other a little bit, and we spent one night on the road, literally sleeping in a picnic area. And then the next day we arrived at our location, and we parked the car, and we first skied across this lake. We put on our backpacks. We have our maps. We have our compasses. We both can read a map. We both can read a compass. We ski across the lake. We get to be quiet because skiing is kind of a quiet thing, cross-country skiing. And we get to where we're supposed to be, and we triangulate the location of the cabin, and it's not there. And so we're staring at our map, and we're like, it's on the map, and we're looking around, and we can't see this. Are we in the right spot? We begin to question everything, and suddenly my ski gets stuck underneath something under the snow, and I can't get it out. And I get my ski out, and I see as I get my ski out that it's the bottom of a burnt cabin. So the cabin had burned down at some point, and never made it into the guidebook or on the map. And so now it's getting to be sunset because we spent so much time looking for the cabin, and we don't have our tent with us because we're not tenting. We're snow caving and staying in cabins along the way. So we stayed in another cabin way down the way. But we were on the leeward side of, is it the windward? We're on the windward side. All the snow is blown away from where we are. So there's only like 4 or 5 or 10 inches of snow where we are. All the snow's out on the lake, and so there's no shelter. And we know that we're in serious trouble because we have gear to be inside of something to be protected from the wind, at least, if not the cold. But we don't have anything for survival other than our sleeping bags and our pads and our shovel. And the shovel's useless. Not enough snowbank to dig away into survival. So we found an edge of ice that had slipped out over the lake off of the land.
Mm-hmm.
With enough space for us to get underneath with our noses touching the ice side by side. And so we figured that part out. And then what we did is we found ice slabs and we broke ice slabs and we made a rim around this outside edge of the slab, which was on my side. And we snuck our way inside of after having supper, inside our sleeping bags with our pads. And we lay all night long awake, because the ice was cracking all night long. Boom, crack, bang. And the natural fear is a slab going to slide down on us, which it didn't. But what happened to the two of us were that we were thrust immediately into a survival situation. And what we believed about each other to be true, which was that both of us had good skills and that we were level-headed and that we would take care of each other. We learned immediately that night to trust each other and each other's judgment. We were both independent and responsible backpackers who brought our skill sets together. It was really a beautiful thing. It was set us up for what was coming, and I just had to shut off my alarm on my phone because you couldn't hear it, but I could hear loons calling in the background. It's like, so we ski out. We take this 8-day trip, and we have an incredible time. And we now trust each other, and we snow cave, and we had
found another cabin.
Yeah, it was great. Found another cabin, spent time, melted ice, talked, had campfire, all that kind of stuff. It was great.
Yeah.
Skied back out. What were you going to say, Steve?
And the only kind of odd thing that you discovered on the drive up was that Tim had a car that his father said, don't let anybody drive it. And Tim wouldn't let him drive it. So you're driving 12 hours from Montana up into British Columbia, and he has to drive the whole time, and you're like, hey dude, let me just drive, and he's like, no, you can't do it. And so that was maybe a little bit of a red flag, and that story kind of comes in a little bit later, so I just wanted to
thank you for that too. It was totally a red flag. And the upside, okay, what I decided on the ride was he also only wanted to listen to jazz.
Okay.
But I had never listened to jazz all my life. I was a rock,
Yeah,
WBCN in Boston. I became a jazz lover from that trip. I'm still a jazz lover. I've listened to jazz every week for the rest of my life. But he would not let me drive his car. And because his dad had given it to him. He was from a wealthy family, and they had rules, and I had to abide by them.
Hey, we have rules.
Yeah, and he was driving, it was his car. I was like, okay, I can, but no, even with that red flag,
wasn't like he was evil.
No, and he was also an atheist.
Okay,
which was interesting. He was not my first atheist friend. I've had many in my life. I still do, but religion was off the table too. And I had come out of I'd been a natural born mystic. I had been one my whole life, and plus I came out of Catholic school. I had been born again, but by this point, I was back to being an acid dropping, pot smoking hippie.
Right.
So, but very spiritually oriented, and meditator. I'd been meditating and I wasn't like I was dropping acid all the time because I was I had, and he hadn't.
And thank you for adding that in, because it's kind of important too, that you didn't just when you finally what's going to happen up on the weeping wall in the next part of the story. It wasn't your first experience with with God and beliefs. You had this foundation from a relatively normal childhood that you grew up safe in that sort of thing. Do we need to do we need to add a part about your sister at all at this point, or?
Well, sure, we can toss her in. As I say that, my dear departed sister, whom I still love, she had run away when I was 14, and from the family point of view, she'd vanished. My mom blamed herself, and that self-recrimination became a prison of darkness for her, and it basically destroyed our family. We're still together. We hung through it. It's not like the whole thing shattered, but it was very painful and ongoing. And so that's why I was in Montana in the first place. I
Right.
couldn't take it, and so.
So she's an older sister, and 4 years older, and she kind of at a young age just disappears and throws mom and dad into a bit of turmoil. And there's like this drama and uneasiness about this, and rightfully so. And you are like 17 or 18 years old, or kind of for a year.
I'm out of here. So the thing about an estrangement like that is that with a death, you can mourn the death, but with an estrangement, there's only ongoing grief. So there's no closure. There's no end to it. And so although the intensity isn't as sharp as the loss, a death, it is a different kind of accumulation of the same pain. So that's really I remember my mom saying, if only, and I'm not even going to say it because I don't want to say that out loud.
So let's go to the Weeping Wall, because I never heard of the Weeping Wall until I read your book, but it's a pretty kind of special place up in British Columbia. Tell us about it.
Yeah, it's a world famous ice climb, and it's at the intersection, close enough to the intersection of two major roads, what account for major roads up in this sparsely populated, incredibly beautiful place. And north of Banff, maybe a day's drive north of Banff. And Banff is in Alberta, for those of you who don't know. It's really beautiful on the Icefields Parkway. It's just so gorgeous. But this is an international climb. It's known worldwide. People come in from all over the world to climb this, and it's part of the reason is that it's so accessible. It's great terrain, and it's like 100 yards maybe off the highway with a parking lot next to a river. So it's easy in and easy out, and it's a 10,000 or so. I can't remember the height of the mountain, 10 or 12,000 feet mountain. But the climb is lower. The lower section, 500 or 600 feet, and it's vertical ice, and it's beautiful. And so when we get there that morning after our snow caving trip, we're the last team to arrive, and we're watching. Then another thing happened as we're getting our gear off to begin this climb, and I'd never ice climbed before. I'd rock climbed, but I'd never ice climbed. So my first time with an axe in my hands with crampons on, and putting in ice screws and taking them out. And so let's
just go for a world-class climb the first time out.
Well, because it was, I trusted Tim. I trusted this guy. He was also a certified lead climber, and we did some bouldering together. So like he tested me out. And this, I don't even know if this enters into the book, but we went out for a day climbing together so he could see my climbing skills, as well he should, right? And vice versa, because this is serious stuff. And I'd forgotten about that. It just flashed in my head. So he had vetted me. Yeah. But again, so he knew that I was a mountain goat. That's really what it comes down to. And so I have cloven hooves in the bottom of my feet when I'm on a mountain. I can stand in little tiny places, and I've done that my whole life. So I'm a natural climber. I started out as a climber. That's another story. But as a baby, as soon as I could walk, I was climbing. So we get to the climb, and as we're watching the climb, there's a bunch of other teams on the ice. A guy falls. So suddenly this guy, his pin pulled out, or he lost his grip. I wasn't really looking, but as soon as he screamed, I looked up, and I watched him slide, kind of fall away and fall down some distance past his next ice screw. So he might have been, 10 feet above his ice screw. I don't really know. So he fell 20 feet. If he's 10 feet above the screw or whatever, it's 5 feet. He still fell this long distance, and there's slack in the line. So he did this bounce and slam, and everybody held their breath. The whole place was just one unified, oh my God. Nobody said a word, but and we wait, and he says, I'm okay. And he continues to climb, and we're all like, so the climb begins, and then we get on the ice. So my adrenaline is already pumped. I'm already up. And so we get on the ice, and I only have one ice axe and an ice hammer. Oh, swallow. That's my mistake.
Right.
Tim and I both agreed that we could do this. I'm going to accept the bravado that I told him that I could. I was like, don't worry about me. I can do this. And I did. The difference is that with an ice axe, you can put it in the ice and then you can let go and you can rest. It has a strap. You can just dangle on it and relax. As long as your hand is open, you can relax and the strap is tied to your wrist. Physics holds it in place. But the hammer, you put the little tiny hammer, and the hammer's much shorter. It's used to put in ice screws and take ice screws out and to chip at the ice to make the place for the ice screw to go in, that kind of thing. But it also has the same kind of blade on the front. It's a serrated bird's beak, and you can use it to hang on. And it has a strap, so you can't drop it. Because if you drop it, then you're serious. That's the other reason why hammers have straps, because you don't want to drop that thing.
Right.
I could do this climb, but the difference was I had to hold on to the hammer the whole time. I could never relax. And so I burned out my forearms rapidly. And that slowed us down significantly. So by the time we reached the top of the climb, because I had to do all this resting, I had to rest for long periods of time to make the next move. And so I was moving at a slower pace than everybody else. By the time we reached the top of the climb, everybody was done and on their way out, and the sun was setting. And before we even got to the top of the climb, it was quite a while before that we knew that we were in serious trouble. You can't, unlike backpacking where you can just turn around and go back down the trail again, you can't do that with ice climbing. You have to go to the top and you have to rappel down. It's a different kind of thing. And
Did you say that you knew you were in serious trouble before you were even finished climbing to get to the top? Yeah,
we both, and the reason why we knew that is because we both were, wilderness winter experiencers, because we knew that as soon as that sun goes down, it was going to drop 30 degrees and it was going to be dark and we still had to get down off the mountain and we didn't have any gear to stay there. So it wasn't like we get to the top and then we're like, oh, now we're in trouble. It was more like all the way up. We're like, well, probably the last third of the climb, I was like, oh my God, we're in trouble. And I was on the National Ski Patrol, volunteer. And so I was out working on mountains and ski hills since I was in high school, pulling people off with frostbite and hypothermia and that kind of stuff. So, but Tim didn't even need to have that training to know what kind of trouble we were in. It was pretty obvious.
Did anything ever get said at that point, or like, did you have that conversation, or did you just sort of know it?
No, we had a conversation about it. We also had a conversation about the decision that we both made. Tim accepted, like I'm pretty sure I bravadoed my way into it, but Tim accepted his responsibility as the lead climber with the training, to accept some of the distribution of the blame of the choice of the hammer and the axe.
Yeah.
I can't tell you, okay, what a stand-up guy this guy was.
Mm-hmm.
Again and again and again, I trusted him with my life, and he trusted me with his. And because of this distinct honesty of needing to, that first night, of needing to trust my life with this guy, it creates this, not just a bond, it creates a truthfulness. And Tim was a stand-up guy. So
you're at the top of the mountain.
I didn't even answer your question yet. The question was, yes, we had the conversation about the cold. We had that last third of the climb up. We were talking to each other. We're like, this is what are we going to do?
Right.
And what we decided to do was stop talking about it and focus on the climbing to move as quickly as possible.
Okay.
So we both were aware of it. And then when we got to the top, we discussed the circumstances that we were in. We didn't go into any sort of why we were there. We knew why we were there.
Yeah.
And we knew what was going to happen. It became a time of making as quick a series of rational decisions as possible, because the awareness of the danger for the audience, isn't just that it was really cold and the temperature was going to drop, is that we knew a 30-degree drop with our sweat was going to kill us. Because you can spend, like, I live on the coast of Maine. If you fall in the 50-degree water that's right outside here in the wintertime, you have 20 minutes before you die. And
Yeah.
that is a rule. There's no futzing with that. And so the same is true for, we knew that we had 3 rappels in the dark, in the cold, and we had no food because it's a day climb. We ran out of water because we drank it for the same reason. No gear to spend the night. So we immediately discussed our options and decided that we were going to die. And if we were going to die, we were going to try to get off the mountain dying, than stay where we were and die without trying.
Right. So now you're at the top, and you have to essentially do 3 rappels down, each one about 150 feet. Once you get down to the bottom, then you're in a safety zone. But even those don't go as easy as they're supposed to go. Like every one of them everyone kind of had a problem. So it was, like you wanted to save, like there was like a piece of a little harness or a little thing that you would normally do a procedure with, and you're like, oh, it's going to cost us an extra $1 if we do that. Let's not do that. We'll save the $1, but then that ends up practically killing you. That one decision.
Yes. Okay, so it's very difficult for me to describe the terror of the night. We were both level-headed.
Yes,
but we were also hypothermic. And hypothermia messes with your brain and makes you make bad choices.
And we don't have to go through the details. Somebody can get the book.
Oh yeah, right.
Heaven is beautiful, and go through it. Oh, there it is. Look at that.
It came out in 4 or 5 different editions.
This is an older edition. I think.
No, that is a printing by Guideposts.
Beautiful.
A bunch of different publishers published it, including, well, I could give you the list, but it was published all over the place with a bunch of different publishers. But I'm so glad to see the Guidepost version of it, because it's a rare thing for me to see. Thank you for holding that up.
So let's get to the point where you rappel down once after much drama. You get to basically you're at a pretty safe spot, like where you're landed after, and once you finally get to that you can go to the next place, you're in a pretty good spot to just like hang out. It's dark though. The moon's out, so you got a little bit of light. It's not like you're working in pitch black, but it's cold and getting colder, and you guys are hungry and getting tireder and making crazy decisions. So you go down the second rappel down, and then you were the second person to go down. So what happened? Pick up the story from that point when you kind of land on what turns out to be a ledge.
It's a ledge, and in the ledge is an iron pin and an iron ring with a carabiner and a strap and a carabiner, and we hook into this. So it's the first time all night long that Tim is to my left and I'm to his right, and we're on a ledge with the mountain in front of us, off the ice, and 150 feet behind us, and the strap is keeping us safe. We're not going to fall. So that's the first time all night long we're like, okay, there's no falling zone. And so I take the rope and I tie one end to my harness because I'm the last guy down, and I toss off the rope off to one side in order to pull it back down that rappel that we just came down through, and it jams on the first pull. And now on the very first pull, I can't get this thing loose, and I can't go back up the rope, and I can't climb up the mountain because I have crampons on, and my hands are frozen and my feet are frozen, and I'm rapidly losing all of my ability to make rational choices. But we made one choice, and that was to stay where we were and keep pulling on the rope, which I couldn't get free. And so then I kept falling asleep and collapsing to the kind of going unconscious and collapsing and getting back up. And then I get back up this time after being asleep, and my vision became peripherally black, and this blackness just closed down on me like this,
Mm.
just into tunnel vision extremely fast. And in that moment, I thought I was going to lose consciousness, although I didn't know what was going on. I'd never seen such a thing before in my life. But I didn't lose consciousness. I stayed awake. And I was astounded that I was awake, and I didn't understand what was going on because I didn't have any pain anymore. And I was thinking pretty clearly, but in front of me where the mountain was supposed to be, and I didn't have a body at that point. I was sort of just I don't know how to describe myself, like a small shape of thought, and I could see, and I could see this infinite darkness, and it went on forever, but it was visible darkness. It wasn't like being in a pitch black thing. And way far, far in the distance, a point of light appeared, popped into existence, or came in within visual field and rushed toward me from an incredibly far distance, much faster than the speed of light, and became larger and larger because the distance was vast. It became larger and larger as it approached me at this almost instantaneous speed, while communicating directly to my soul. I'm taking you. But it wasn't language. It wasn't a request. It was an explanation. This is what is happening. It wasn't. And I put up all of my willpower, which was substantial for driving myself to live all through that night, but it was nothing in comparison. My substantiality was a centimeter, and its power was 100,000 light years.
Mm.
It was so much greater than me, and it enveloped me and took me, and I was carried inside of it, and I suddenly went from being befuddled into a state of comfort and being loved and cared for, and I had no agency anyway. I understood that this intelligence, this all power, I could do nothing. I was a rag doll in a river, but I was comfortable, and I traveled inside of this orb, this entity, which I knew. I understood where I was, in that I'd met this entity before, so I had no fear at all. I just traveled with it. I didn't understand it. That's a different thing. I just knew all was well. And then I popped out into this vaster, more vast, this darkness that we traveled through was, you could say it was a tunnel in comparison to the size of the vastness in which I then found myself.
Okay.
And I describe it as an illuminated darkness, or better yet, it's nothingness. There is no thing there. I am in a place of no thingness, and I am no thing. There's no molecules. There's no substantiality or materialism that I could possibly metaphorically describe. It is infinite in scope, and I know that I can't see the end of its infinity, but I can see deep into infinity. I can't see the beginning, but I can see further than I'd ever seen before, much further. And I was comfortable. I was suddenly this, and I'm going to use language to describe it, metaphor. I was a large orb, a ginormous orb of energy, of consciousness, and the energy of myself was my consciousness. And it was my thinking. When I say it was my consciousness, it wasn't like when I think, oh, I'm in my brain. I had no brain. I had no body. My energy was exactly who I was. And who I was could see in every direction at once. And who I was, oh, this is me. I'd forgotten me. It was like waking up from a dream. And suddenly you're in a nightmare, and then you wake up and you find yourself in your room with your comforter and your pillow and the person you love, and you're like, oh, that wasn't me at all. This is me. That's what it was like. I was me again. And as this entity, in this vastness which extended in every direction, I was alone and unafraid. And then I describe it as a portal. But near-death experience is this thing that keeps revealing itself. I only got to bring back a small bit of it with me. And so there's this vast trove that I sometimes tap into to see and can see little bits more. I don't make that happen. It just sort of shows itself. And so I see this, I describe it as a doorway or a portal, and it's ginormous, but it's also the divine light itself. But I don't know that when I see it. I just find it compelling and attractive, and it's transparent and translucent, and it's solid at the same time. It's this flow. You could, as a good Catholic kid, you could think about it as the pearly gates. I'm at the pearly gates, only it's a gateway, but it's like a waterfall of pearlescence, and that I can see through. And as I see through it, there's this long, infinitely arcing tunnel, not as deep as infinity itself, but goes a long, long way. And it's somehow another tunnel inside of the entity itself, because the I'll get to that in a second. So I can see through it, I can see into it, I can see its surface, and it's compelling to touch it. So it's attractive and kind of calling to me without sound. So I reach and I touch it, and it flows into me, all this life and livingness and eternal nature and creativity and beauty and joy and understanding and livingness. And it shows all these things to me all at once. It's timelessness, and I talk about it in a chronological sequence, but there's no chronology. It's all instantaneous, and it's all communication without language. It's all this. I'm immersed in. I call it the voice. It surrounds me. It's outside of me, and yet it's right inside of me, and it has no language. It speaks directly to my soul, and data downloads that I completely comprehend without thought, just experience. And so all of this infills me, and I see all these parts of things all at once. And I'll tell it this way today, to break up the chronology, to show that it's in timelessness. I'll tell it in a sort of different way. So then I had an experience of being known. And I knew that the knower of all, capital K, knew every aspect of my Peterness, myself, of my life as Peter. And it could see all of the corners of my life, and there was nothing hidden whatsoever. All that I'd shut away in closets of darkness was revealed and had always been known. It had never been hidden. It was always present to the omniscient mind. It was always knowing what and who I am and what I did. And it knew me in my everything that I did wrong. And I went through a hell of my own making. I went through all of the suffering I'd ever given everyone in my entire life. And I experienced it from inside their body, inside their brains, inside their emotional experience of the moment when it happened. And I experienced it simultaneously inside of my old own self, who had used reason and decision to judgment to cause them pain intentionally. And what the difference was is that the pain that I thought that I was giving to them was, say, a 1 on a massive scale, but it turned out to be a 1,000 or a 10,000 on their end of it. So I thought I was giving them this little bit of pain, but from their experience, as I experienced the hell that I gave them with my hate or my envy or my anger or whatever it was, I saw my justifications and reasons for causing such an immense amount of pain were nothing. I was guilty as shown. I judged myself guilty for having caused so much pain, but I could see all these different things at once. I could see not only my experience of the sequential life review wasn't like a movie. It was like I was in an avatar game. I was like in a game, only I was all of the characters in the game, and I could feel what they were all feeling and see what they were all seeing all at once. But I also could see humanity. I could see that, and I could see the edge of creation. And what I understood was that I was a player in a game, in a matrix game, that I didn't create, and I was not responsible for the rules, the algorithms that defined the field of the universe in which I found myself, and for the whole cosmos. It wasn't just Earth that was in this game, and just humanity. It was the whole cosmos was in this. The whole universe was in this structure. But humanity was central to my looking at it, and what I understood was shown, not looked at. What was shown was this great radical equality of human limitedness, which was also expressed universally. The universe itself is limited, even with its massive size of interstellar space. It's limited compared to the divine self that is unlimited. And so this radical comparison between these two things, I understood that no one is worthy. No one. Everyone is part. It's not because you're bad. It's because you're in the game and you didn't create it. But yes, I had free will and I had agency, and I chose the darker parts of the algorithm to express it and aim it at people, and gave them some of that pain, which was hell. But the weirdest thing was that it didn't really attach to them permanently. It attached to me. So all of the suffering I gave away, it was mine to keep. And so I went through what I now describe in the book. I call it hell, my own personal hell. But I now describe it as the purgative fire of divine love. I went through this situation where the voice was knowing me and loving me as I was. With the things that I did, I was beloved anyway. I love you. I forgive you. I love you. I've always known this about you. I never judged you for this. But it was this release. I released all of my attachments. I had all the pain that I gave away attached me to the world. And when those pains that I gave away that attached to me were detached from me, I was infilled with a million times greater amount of love and light and beauty and joy as I kind of turned my face from myself into the face of the beloved divine, who's, that's a metaphor. And I couldn't see a face. There was no face. It was love beyond explanation. But it was the self. It was the self of God, the capital S divine self, the Atman, the Brahman, the Yahweh, whatever you want, whatever language you want to throw on that. None of them are adequate for it. And I was saved by love from myself, and shown that was never me. Those things were never me. What I am, I was shown the origin of the creation of myself. I could hear my name being called, but it wasn't the whole time. It still echoes inside me. And it's not something I can say. It's the source of my soul coming into being called by the word spoken, by the breath given, by the photon emoted, by the quanta created in my individualized limited form, from manifested from unmanifested, limited from unlimited. And I was brought into being from the divine self, and I could see myself as the core of myself, the identity of the sameness of the divine. And it was like, I describe it as a singular photon in a field of photons. Of all the photons that ever existed in the history of the universe, all in one field. They don't collapse into a black hole, except for I couldn't see into the depth of infinity in the same way you can't see into a black hole. I couldn't see the depths of infinity. Even when it filled me with union, it was still beyond me. And I saw like this huge, long life of my soul. My soul, so now it's not temporal, but my soul had intersected with temporal existence, worlds, many times as incarnated selves, but never once were they me. They were all these little tiny thin things that had large lives, but in comparison to the size of my soul, they were infinitesimal comparison to the soul. But yet there was also seemed to be interacting with the soul. So there was some sort of I don't know how to describe it. I learned from them. Maybe I'm blind to it now. I could see that they were there, but I can't tell you what they were. And I've never bothered to explore them because not one of them ever was me. So why? So I'm much more interested in identifying, spending my life seeking the origin of myself from the divine. I seek the origin of myself, of my soul, by seeking the divine. I don't seek myself, because even my soul is created. I knew I was creature in the face of creator, and creator was, I was made from, of, by, through, but made. And I knew that everything I had done in my human life, everything I had lived in my soul, was utterly known to the divine. There was nothing of any of those lives, or the existence of my soul. My whole self was known. And I was infilled with this combination of all these things that we fragment here: beauty, love, truth, joy, knowledge, understanding, intellect, awe, and they're all one. And I was that one, less than the infinite, but infilled beyond my capacity to express it.
You, in the book, you describe that. You've done a better job, I think. My understanding is feels more complete today than it did when I read it. And the judgment part was sad, or it was because there was a lot of pain that you were feeling. But just to clarify, the judgment wasn't coming from the creator. The judgment was all you looking at your life and judging yourself and feeling like an overwhelming regret about some of the choices that you had made. And you were able to experience the pain that others felt from the actions that you had taken during that, first 20 years of your life.
Yes. And the comparison was of my own limitedness in comparison to unlimited, of my own imperfection compared to perfection. So it wasn't like, I understood that I was not to fault, but I also very clearly understood how tiny I am in comparison to the divine self, and how great the love is. So I made the comparison was self-evident to me. The immense amount of love that was being poured into me it spoke for itself. And all I had to do was listen to it. And by listening to it, accepting it, just by listening to it was the acceptance of it. And all of my self-judgment and regrets and recriminations and all that stuff, they were gone. No more suffering. Suffering ended. It was forgotten. I was healed and whole in a way that I never was in my life, and haven't been for long periods of time since. Touched upon it a couple of times since then, a few times, but not the same.
Our friend Kathy Mason, who is the one who introduced me, she's been following along, and she just says some nice, lovely things. That she was a player in the game, in a matrix. She didn't connect. I was loved anyway. Just saying that is beautiful, and she loves this. Thank you, Peter. Thank you. I seek the origin of the divine. So yeah, and then Selma Rita Laporte joins us for the first time, and she just checks in too. So I wanted to share those comments. So this is all happening kind of like in a matter of minutes, and you've obviously had 30 years plus 40 years to to reflect on this and to understand it better. But let's kind of at least wrap up the story of what happened that night. You're on the ledge. The rope is jammed up. You go unconscious to Tim, who's attached to the wall right next to you, and you're unconscious, and then all of a sudden he kind of is yelling at you.
So I made a choice to come back, and I was allowed to make my choice, and so I came back. There's more in the book about that. what that was all about. But I was allowed to come back, and I was made a choice about what life I was going to live. I was given many options, and I chose a particular path. In an instant, I had only a moment to make the decision, and I was reduced in size, smushed down to fit inside my mortal self, and then and instantly I was transported from bliss and the end of suffering back into a world of suffering. And the hell that I experienced upon coming to was comparable to the one that I experienced in heaven, because there was no pain there. All pain had ended. And so I came back into my body, and slowly my body came back online. My brain came back up to function, and I began to hear. And as I began to hear, I heard screaming, and it turned out to be Tim screaming. And as he pulled me up, and I began to understand him, I heard him say, "You are dead. You are dead. If you die, I am going to die." And he was in a panic for the first time, because the realization of death next to him would hit him pretty hard.
Yeah.
And
not leave him very many good options for saving himself at that point.
no, he was not going to be able to save himself any more than I could have saved us.
There was two things. There were two reasons that you gave for when you had the conversation about, do I stay or should I go? And one was about your sister, and the other one was about this play that you were committed to, being in a couple of weeks down and back in Montana, which kind of seems like small potatoes at the time. But, you had a real concern for your parents, because your parents had suffered so much with your sister's crazy story, that you felt like this isn't good for them. And so that was part of the reason. Tim didn't even factor into, the thing. You kind of, but the creator said to you, you can go back, but you won't live your life. Is that what he said? Or she said? Or
it said, yes, that's what was said to me. You can go back, but you won't live your life.
When I read that, I had to read that like 3 times. I was thinking that was a misprint. I was thinking like you can go back and live your life. And I'm like, and I that kind of like did like a little tweak to my head when I read it.
Yeah, my life was over. That's I was allowed to come back, but my life was over. I was to die. Like people talk about fate. My fate was to die on that mountain. And the divine kept inviting me home. Come home. It's your time to come home. Come home. It's your time to come through the door. But allowing me the time to the time to discuss it and think it through, and showing me that my parents would be fine if I just stayed dead. They'll be here in a wink of an eye, because that's the length of life, which I knew was true. Hard to see that on this side, but the length of a life is the wink of an eye. And it's that fast. And my parents were going to be fine, but I couldn't abide there in heaven, knowing the length of my life to come was a wink of an eye, if not go back and spend that wink, not letting my parents suffer further brokenness. And so God, for some reason, and I don't know why, I was allowed to come back. But when I said I choose to live my life, the voice said, "You won't live your life." My life, I came back a different person. And I lived a different life. My whole life from that point forward was going to end. I was never going to be an architect, because I was going to die on that mountain, and there would have been no architecture for the dead. And so from that point on, when I came back, I took a whole nother path, partly out of desperation, because I was so confused about what had happened to me. I was completely alone. 1981, no data out there, no web, no way to look this up, no language for it, didn't know what to call it, never heard of such a thing before. And that was set me on a path of inner exploration. I'd been a natural born mystic. So I'd had some experiences when I was a child that now, looking back over my shoulder, I get to see, oh, I learned this, that, and the other thing, and it's kind of set me up for this thing that just happened to me. And that
Mm.
continues to be the case, that every time I have another kind of experience that is out of this world type of mystical experience, looking back over my shoulder, I see I see how the parts fit together, but I can't see that going forward. I can only see that looking backward. I
Mm.
know, and it's so my life. The next 2 days later, I'm hitchhiking back to Bozeman because there was a terrible car wreck, and I'm by myself, and this roaring voice is screaming inside me, and I can't shut it off. And it's not even talking in language, and it's calling my name like the sound of a waterfall, calling me to itself, roaring inside me, speaking, and it drowns out myself. And it's in I don't hear it in words, but what it's saying to me is, you work for me. You're mine. You're a messenger. You do this thing. And my response was, "Pa, no, I'm not." I zipped my lips because the craziest part of this was there's no language that comes with this. The thing itself is non-linguistic. How do you talk about that which, if you're a messenger, how do you talk about that which is unspeakable? Well, you can't, by definition. And so I was pretty upset. I was mad at God for this longest time, because I didn't understand that I wasn't going to live the life that I was going to live. I didn't understand that it was over, and so I was angry at God for a decade. Even though even though I was being driven to dive ever deeper into it, I was just PO'd all the time, and depressed at the flatness of the existence here. The most beautiful thing, it was had no joy for me whatsoever, because the only joy that I knew was greater was not here. And so my quest became, for my life, as my interior journey, how do I tear open the closed gate, which was still wide open because I couldn't shut this thing off. It's always screaming inside me. But how do I re-aim myself at the divine to bring some heaven here, to give myself some solace while I have to live? And so my journey took me deeply inward, and I ended up going to divinity school to study mysticism. And I didn't tell anybody. I kept my secret, my NDE secret. I kept my mysticism secret. I kept the whole thing secret. And I learned practices of contemplation and meditation, and I put them to use, to daily use. I still practice. I just did it by myself and didn't tell anybody, not even my family. And my wife knew that I had died, but she's the only one I told. God bless her for her sainthood. But
But you sprung it on her the night before your wedding, so you didn't give up a lot
yeah,
of time
I should have let her read that part of the book.
but you could
Because
write the book for another 25 years.
yeah, but she reminded me after the publication that no, actually, I told her the next morning,
Mm.
and I believe her recollection of it.
Mm.
I was I have no problem admitting and telling the truth where I've made a mistake, because I don't try to speculate about what I don't know. There's
Right.
this sort of, I don't know what I would call it, that comes from seeing yourself in comparison to the divine, a nakedness. There's a nakedness that doesn't sort of leave. And so what I did in that circumstance was I told her, and then I said, you don't have to stay if you don't want to.
Yeah.
We should probably separate now that you know. And she wanted to stay.
Yeah.
And so we're still together, but it's it's been hard. It's hard on a family to be married to a mystic like me, because I don't live attached to the world like other people do.
Right.
I love my family, and I've worked hard to support them. I do what I'm supposed to do as a dutiful person, but my heart belongs to God. I am not from here. I know you talked about eternity in the beginning, and you asked a very interesting question. if the soul is eternity, if the soul is eternal, is there a time when it is not eternal? How can that be?
Right.
And I know my eternal nature. I know that's really a strong statement, but I know my eternal nature. I know that I came. It's not that my body, my soul didn't come and inhabit my body. My soul manifests my body. My body is in my soul. It's not the other way around. The body is DNA and biology and all the rest of the stuff that goes with the science of that. But its animation of itself, its mind and brain comes from my soul. But there's the forgetfulness, and there's a veil, and the whole practice of the interior life and the interior journey is to remember.
We'll kind of wrap up just for the sake of being respectful of the time. We've gone a little long. It's okay with me, but I didn't. But I just have a couple of observations, and they're just details that aren't that important, but I made a note of them, and I'll just share them, and then you can reflect on them and kind of summarize. But you met several angels along the way, and this is in the immediate aftermath of it. And they weren't angels; they were people. But what they did to you, you needed at that moment in time. And the sheriff who had arrested you and says to the motel owner, "Hey, these boys are okay. Just let them sleep on the floor here." And that motel, I mean, you were like going to go out and sleep on the ice and in the parking lot and die again. The college professor who picked you up and drove you, and he just took care of you when you needed taken care of. And then you met this rancher who bought you breakfast and gave you bus fare to get that last little leg of the way home. I mean, these were all people that just showed up when you needed, you didn't have much reserve left in your tank of humanness. You were like on that ragged edge of it. And so these people, I wanted to just share that. And, you get back and you go back to this play. It was one of the reasons you gave to God that, I got to return because I got to go. I've committed to doing this, touring like a play of, let's call it a play. And you were going to be a driver, but instead you ended up you to your credit, you went, you know what, I'm not in good shape. I had a kind of a rough experience and I can't drive, and but I'll go along. And you ended up riding in the back of the pickup truck, being the hermit. I'm imagining you in the sleeping bag. I mean, you were like alone with your thoughts at that point, and you shared a little bit that went on for the next multiple years. So it was kind of a living hell that you were going through. And I liked, I guess what kind of, maybe the last thing I'll say is that one day a parishioner, someone part of your group, came up and asked you a question, and that how can they, the question was sort of like, how can you deal with what's going on? And you decided that was the day that you were going to finally share the story, and you went public with it. And it was like at least 20 years after the fact. And so quite incredible. We don't plan this journey. We're just on the journey, and you call it the movie or the Matrix. Yeah. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks for having me here today. Thanks for giving me the time to try to bring a little hope into people's lives.
Yeah. So Peter Panagore, its website is Peter Panagore, and .love. And there's a YouTube channel. And I like the idea of not church Sundays. And that's what I remember. That's what caught my attention the first time I heard you, when you were saying no doctrine, no dogma. That was the part that just like was kind of like the straw that broke the back for me, in terms of like the organized religion. It was like the dogma and the doctrine that just wasn't, it didn't mean anything, or it was missing the point. it was like, and it was obvious at that point to me that there were human, man-made rules. They weren't God-made rules. Like all of the churches, like they all touch on the godliness of it all. And they all start from that idea, but then, man or woman comes in and puts different layers on it. And it becomes, it becomes something that's, that no longer resonated with me personally. And so anyway, I love your story because, you're helping me to understand, and that's a beautiful thing. And I'm sure you're helping others. So, thank you for joining us this morning. Is there anything you want to say to kind of wrap this up?
Sure. If you've had a mystical experience, anybody, you're welcome to contact me at peterpanagore.love if you want to talk about it. I can help. If it's troubling you, I can help you. But I also want to end with the 1 John. God is love. That's just the truth of it. And love is inborn into us. Yeah. And you don't need to do anything other than love the people you love. Yeah. Just love.
Thank you, Peter.
You're welcome.
All righty. So we'll say goodbye to you. Thank you for joining us, and incredible story. Please, I recommend that you grab the book and enjoy it, but then reach out to Peter, especially if you've had that mystical experience, because this is your purpose at this point. You're here to help. So thank you.
I'm here to help. Thank you for having me. Peace to you all.
Thank you, Peter. Wow. That was something else. So Selma says, Peter, you were given that opportunity to continue living here because there was a plan to change your life and the life of others. I'd suggest you read books by Alan Kardec, and I'm sure that you'll get some answers to your questions. You find them for free at kardecpedia.com. All right. So thank you, Selma, for sharing that. I read the book, and I just felt a connection that I wanted to invite Peter to share the story, and I'll just say thank you at that. So I'm going to wrap up and get out of here. I'll be back. I think I'm going to be here tomorrow, although I don't have a guest. I'm going to definitely be here on Friday. Kimberly Palm will be my guest, and we're going to talk about living a purposeful life. Let's just leave it at that. We'll see you next time.